It's day 17 of the war and the third week of the war. And the big update is this: things are getting worse. Israeli airstrikes continue on Gaza. In fact, yesterday night was the most violent yet. Around 400 people were killed, yet there is no sign of the ground invasion. The troops are ready, the machinery is ready, but the green signal has not come. So tonight, we're looking at 5 questions. Hopefully, they'll explain where the conflict stands right now. Question number 1, what is the situation inside Gaza? In 2 words, really bad. Israel claims to have struck 320 targets in 24 hours. 320 targets in 24 hours. This includes Hamas launch pads and command centers. They've also released footage of these attacks. Take a look. Of course, it wasn't just Hamas targets. A number of civilian targets were also hit, like in Khan Yunis. It's a city located in southern Gaza, just about 15 kilometers from the border crossing at Rafah. Technically, it's a safe zone, but on Sunday, it was pounded. People there called it the worst night since the war began.
We're told that Khan Yunis is considered to be a safe place, and everyone came here, from the north or from Gaza City, because it is considered safe. But unfortunately, last night was the hardest night so far we saw in Khan Yunis.
The death toll keeps rising. It has crossed 5,000 in Gaza. Reports say around 40% of the fatalities are children. Injuries are also rising. More than 15,000 Gazans are wounded. Hospitals there have been overrun by patients, which brings us to aid. There is good news and bad news on that front. The good news is that aid is moving. Around 3 aid convoys have entered the Gaza Strip. More trucks should follow soon. And the bad news? It's nowhere enough. The United Nations says the current aid is just 4% of the pre-war average. It's hard to explain Gaza's situation in words, so we'll use a video instead. It's from Gaza City in the north. Look at the situation after an Israeli airstrike there. Question number 2. What is Israel's next move? Their Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a busy weekend. He first visited Israel's border with Lebanon. He spoke to soldiers stationed there. Netanyahu broadly outlined his plan for Gaza. This is what he said.
We're in a battle for our lives, a battle for our home. This is not an exaggeration. This is the war. It's do or die. They need to die. And we are now in a double battle. One battle is a battle to hold action here, and on the other side, to win there, an absolute victory that will erase Hamas.
A battle to erase Hamas. That seems to be Israel's end game here, to end Hamas's rule in the Gaza Strip. Of course, this means invading by ground. Hamas has taken up positions deep inside Gaza. You cannot flush them out with airstrikes alone. A ground operation will be necessary. The question is, when will it start? After visiting the northern border, Netanyahu convened his war cabinet. All his top officials were present: the army chief, the Mossad chief, and the Shin Bet chief. Now, they hold the key to the next stage of this war. A few limited raids have already been carried out in Gaza. Israeli soldiers entered several meters into Gazan territory. What was their mission? Find hostages and drive out terrorists. Hamas fired back at the Israelis. They claimed the IDF soldiers fled the area. Now, this was not a full-scale incursion, but it was a sneak peek.
The IDF forces raided Gaza today, close to the border, as part of the effort to prepare the space for an attack following information on the missing and abducted, a top priority of national mission. During one of the raids, an IDF fighter was killed and 3 fighters were wounded.
The real invasion would be much uglier. Israel has talked about a long and tough war. And on Sunday, their defense minister mentioned a vague timeline. He said it could take 1, 2, or 3 months. Whichever it is, their objective seems clear now: remove Hamas from Gaza. And frankly, Israel does not have a choice. After the brutality of Hamas's attack, no country can let them stay in power. But how they do it is a different issue altogether. And that's linked to our third question. What are Israel's allies up to? Well, the solidarity visits continue. On Saturday, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni visited Israel. Today, the Dutch Prime Minister is visiting, and tomorrow, the French President, President Emmanuel Macron, is going to Israel. But is that solidarity equal to support? Well, at first, Western leaders gave Israel a long rope. But that seems to be changing. They haven't used the word ceasefire yet, but all the indications are there. Meloni warned Israel against falling into what she calls Hamas's trap. Meanwhile, the EU foreign policy chief called for a humanitarian pause.
This was the real objective of Hamas attack, not to defend the right of the Palestinian people, but to force a reaction against Gaza that would undermine any attempt at dialogue and create an unfillable gap between Arab countries, Israel and the West.
Personally, I think that a humanitarian pause is needed in order to allow the humanitarian support to come into and being distributed. I think that half of the population of Gaza has been moving from their houses.
Leaders of the West also had a virtual meeting on Sunday. It was attended by 6 leaders: Joe Biden of the US, Justin Trudeau of Canada, French President Macron, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. 6 leaders. At the end of it, they released a joint statement. And this is what they said. The leaders reiterated their support for Israel and its right to defend itself against terrorism and called for adherence to international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians. So the support is still there, but it's not endless support. What explains this change in stance? Our next 2 questions should answer that. Question number 4, what's the situation on the northern front? The one with Lebanon. Much more tense. Israel has struck 20 Hezbollah sites in Lebanon. They also hit airports in Syria's Damascus and Aleppo. Both airports were shut down. The exchanges are more frequent now. Israel has also evacuated border cities. It's preparing for the worst. If Hezbollah joins the war, things could spiral out of control. Netanyahu warned them against it. He said Israel would hit back with quote-unquote unimaginable force. So it is a major worry. A wider war will draw in Western countries. It will also increase oil prices. Western leaders are keen to avoid that. Question number 5. What's been the global response? Well, pro-Palestine protests continue. Last week, we showed you the demonstrations in the Muslim world. Now look at the Western cities. In Denmark, hundreds gathered in their capital, Copenhagen. They held up Palestinian flags and shouted slogans. They marched to the Danish parliament in solidarity. Same in Boston. Hundreds of protesters gathered at the city's Copley Square and they had posters saying "Free Palestine." This is Boston.
We want 48. We want 48. We are all Palestinians. We are all Palestinians. In our thousands, in our millions. We are all Palestinians.
In Germany, things got a bit violent. There was an unauthorized pro-Palestine rally in Berlin. The police had to break it up eventually. They also arrested several protesters. In Paris, around 15,000 protesters turned up. Some of them climbed up to statues and waved Palestinian flags. And unlike the rally in Berlin, this one was authorized. If you thought that was big, well, wait for London. 100,000 pro-Palestine protesters marched through the British capital. Let me repeat that. 100,000, 1 lakh protesters. They held up banners and chanted slogans against Israel. These pictures will have an impact. We've already seen countries drawing red lines for Israel. Even India said civilian casualties are a point of concern. New Delhi has also shipped aid to Gaza. An Indian Air Force plane landed in Egypt on Sunday. It was carrying 6 tons of medical aid, plus 32 tons of relief material. So the ball is now in Israel's court. If they push further, they could lose foreign support. If they don't push, they could lose domestic support. There are no easy choices here. But in war, there rarely is.